Hey guys, it's Sam, and this is more recent reads. We'll jump right into it with the weirdest book I've read in a while, and that is Projections by S.E. Porter. This is about a woman, Catherine, and I think it's like the 1800s, who is murdered by her best friend, page one, and her ghost attaches to him magically. And he is like a sorcerer, and like it's the real world, but then he can go into this like area where there are like sorcerers and things, so there's magic. And she is just attached to him as a screaming ghost for the rest of time, essentially. And he starts, because he's a misogynist and completely insane, he says that he's going to like keep killing women until she like finally redeems herself. Like he's going to keep killing women like her until she finally loves him the way that she's supposed to. And she just has to be a witness to this. And so of course she wants to sabotage this. So she's trying to discover how to like get revenge for everything and like take him out in her like undeath. This book I have not heard anyone else talk about, and I can also see why, because this is going to be a book that you can't recommend to everybody and is incredibly niche, and it isn't even necessarily a book that I would say that I enjoyed throughout because it's incredibly slow. However, it is such a interesting undertaking. The world building in this of like the ghosts and all the stuff and the magic is so unique and so interesting. I have never read anything like it before. And then just the like concept of a ghost attached to somebody, like she can't talk, she just screams constantly because like that's how she died. So she's just pulled along by him, this guy who like hates women, obviously, and has to deal with that. And so it's kind of this like commentary on obviously like misogyny and like your own agency and control as a woman and stuff. And all of like the magical elements and things is so cool. And again, that undertaking is so cool. And then he starts sending out projections of himself. So basically like magical things that he creates to like lure these women. That concept is also really cool, like how that's even done. So yeah, this is very long though, and it's very much just like a character study, not very plot driven at all. Very, very, very excruciatingly slow, which I think is also purposeful because her life is that way. And basically he doesn't age either because he's a sorcerer. So she can't just like try to wait until he dies. He just like won't if she doesn't do something. So this is hard to read because she's likable, but he's not. And there are chapters that like kind of follow him and she's just subjected to this. So it's very, very hard to read. Trigger warnings for misogyny, like a lot of it, murder, obviously, and like some body horror stuff. But if you want something incredibly unique, I wouldn't really say this is spooky or scary, even though there's like ghosts and stuff. But if you want something very unique and like just really an interesting undertaking, this is definitely something for you. I really am intrigued by S.E. Porter. I've read another book by her that was like a Baba Yaga inspired YA. This is her first adult. Very just intrigued by like what she chooses to do and how she chooses to write and stuff. So yeah, this I gave 3 out of 5 stars for like an enjoyment standpoint, but like the undertaking of it and the writing of it and stuff, really good, but just very slow. I think could have used some editing, honestly. But I also think some of the reason that it's not edited is very intentional. So yeah, definitely not for everybody. But if you think it might be for you, give it a try. Next, I read Badass Ancestors by Patty Wignington. This I will talk about more in depth on my Patreon because that's where I talk about all my witchy stuff. So I'll have a full video, I think video review. I've been doing video reviews for my witchcraft books over there, but just a Cliff Notes version here. And if you want more information, go over there and check that out. This is a book about ancestor veneration. This was my first book that I've read on ancestor veneration, and this was fine. There were parts of it that were really good. I still tabbed up some things. I tab up most of my witchcraft books. I would say that about half of this though is more like genealogy based and like how to do genealogy, which I totally get. Ancestors. However, if I wanted a book on genealogy, I would have read a book on genealogy and how to do that and how to study that. And so this was just way more heavily based on the genealogy portion than the ancestor portion, even though I know the genealogy portion is an important part of the ancestor stuff. But just say like go and do genealogy work and leave more of the space for the witchy stuff. So yeah, but more in-depth thoughts on Patreon. I gave this 3 out of 5 stars, and I will be looking for more ancestor veneration books. Very interesting topic and very topical. I'm literally filming this a few days before Samhain. By the time you see this, it'll be after Samhain, but I'm doing a whole like ancestor veneration thing on Samhain because that's what you do When the Veil is Thin. Then I read The Ending Fire by Sarah El-Arifi. This is the final book in the Ending Fire series. And again, can't go into much detail about the plot stuff, but this is taking place in a world where everybody is separated by blood color. So everyone is a person of color. I believe everyone's black. People are still marginalized in things based on blood color. So in the first book, we have a girl, well, two women who were switched at birth. One was a part of like a rebellion, and so she was taken from the red-blooded people who are like the highest level in this society and replaced with a girl who has blue blood, and in this like it's sort of like the government part of everything. And so we follow both of these characters, and then their like lives eventually intersect. So throughout this series, there is this like building rebellion. We're learning more about the different like the history, some of the like religious elements, the different like bloods and things. And so by the time we get to this book, there's a lot that has been built up. But what I will say about this book is it did the thing that I talked about in my last video with finales, where it expanded the world a lot in the final book and there was not enough time and it got kind of confusing and there were elements that could have been explored more and things felt rushed. And so like this ending was very unsatisfying for the fact that we're like building up to this rebellion. So there just was a lot of elements that I didn't think were as strong as the first book. I would say the first book was the strongest. Second book was still pretty good. And then the third book fell a little flat for me. There are some really cool elements in here. Like one of the main characters is a trans woman who is also disabled. So she doesn't have hands. So she has to speak completely in sign language that is like with wrists and stuff. And like some of the again, some of the blood stuff and the way that magic is used and things is really cool. So there's like a lot here, but I'm finding now that I've read this series and then Sarah El-Arifi's, I started at least. Did I finish that one? I think I did. The first book in her new series. She like puts a lot into it and then there's too many ends, there's too many loose ends, and it seems like they get kind of away from her, and this is what happened with this book. So she does a lot better when she keeps it like very like tight and restricted to a few characters. So like the first book only followed 2 characters. This third book followed 4, maybe 5, I think 4 at least. So it was just a lot, and again, there was too much to explore by the end, and it didn't feel like we got all of our questions answered, or that it wrapped up in a very satisfying way. So 3 out of 5 stars here. And triggers in here for drug use and emotional abuse. I then read When Among Crows by Veronica Roth. I did not think that I'd be reading a Veronica Roth book again, but everyone was saying how good this is, and it really is. This was originally released as a standalone, but now I think it's going to be either like a companion or like duology, or maybe it's going to be a series of like short novellas. But this is taking place in Chicago. It's kind of like an urban fantasy, but there are Eastern European folklore mythology set in Chicago. Like this is mostly Polish, and I love it because 1, I live in Chicago, so I knew the places they were talking about, which I do like, and 2, I love Eastern European mythology, and like one of those people that's in here is Baba Yaga, so obsessed with that. And this follows a small cast of characters who have to team up to try to complete this mission. There's our main character, I would say, is this man who is a part of some kind of magical society, but you're not exactly sure what the deal is with them, and he is trying to track down Baba Yaga, like legendary Baba Yaga. So it starts out with that, but then he ends up teaming up with, in this world there are creatures that like eat fear, eat anger, eat sorrow, and I think there's one other thing, but it's sort of like all the folklore creatures eat some kind of emotion, basically, or like feed off of some kind of emotion. And so he teams up with someone who can eat fear, and then another person that can eat anger, and like they sort of have this little like friendship that's very quick, and end up going and trying to find Baba Yaga. So I loved all the elements of this. This is very short. Honestly, it could have been longer and I would have loved it even more. At the parts of it that didn't quite land for me, I think I gave this like a 4.5, 0.25, 4.5. But there were parts of it that just felt like a little rushed from a character development standpoint because this is so short. And so there were things and choices that characters made that didn't quite make sense for just like the length of time that they've known each other, because this book takes place over like 2, maybe 3 days. And so there was that. But otherwise, like, all of the mythology elements, all of the world building stuff, all of like the magic and things, very cool. There was very cool lines in here. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. There are triggers in here for blood, torture, and gore. So just know that, because again, some of these Eastern European folktales tend to be like very dark. But this is just the kind of book for me. And since it is going to be like maybe a series duology thing, I will continue reading this. I quite enjoyed it. Then I read House of Frank by Kay Sinclair. This is a kind of cozy fantasy. I mean, it is cozy, but also like it's dealing with really sad topics. It's dealing with death. We have a main character of Seika who is going to the House of Frank, which is a like ash gardens, to bury her sister. So her sister died a few years ago. She has her ashes, and her sister wanted her to plant her ashes because this place, it's all magical. Obviously, like the whole world is magic. This place turns your ashes into trees. And so she tells her sister to go there, but once her sister gets there, once Seika gets gets there, she's like, I can't let her go yet. She's really dealing with a lot of the grief from losing her sister. And so Ash Gardens and Frank, who runs Ash Gardens, who is just like sort of like monster, basically, like he's some kind of like creature. They like say you can stay as long as you want, and then we can eventually do like the burial and stuff, like help around this place. And she also finds out that there's like stuff about Ash Gardens. It's falling apart a little bit, like what's going on. So you get to know like all of these characters that have been at Ash Gardens and are like staying there, and it's really just a very deep exploration of like grief and loss. So there's obviously triggers in here for like death of family members. There's some suicidal ideation, also mentions of like dementia. So the front of this book actually has like all the triggers and stuff covered if you want to look into this more. But yeah, this is cozy while having all of these like really dark topics being explored. And so I ended up really enjoying it. I enjoy books about grief. I will say that there were parts of the like other character relationship stuff that I didn't really feel got as fleshed out. And so like some of our characters besides like Seika and like Frank and stuff, I feel like we could have had a little bit more with them. Like there are elements of this that feel like it's going towards found family, but like not quite for me because we didn't quite like know enough about all of them. We focused a lot on just like a select few. But overall, I really enjoyed this, 4 out of 5 stars. And lastly, I read Nemesis Games by James S.A. Corey. I've been reading these all on audio. I was rereading the first 3 that I had already read, and then I've read books 4 and 5 continue on audio. This is the 5th book in the Expanse series. And again, can't go into a ton of detail because it's book 5, but this is just taking place in the future where humans have gone onto Mars and also settled in the asteroid belt, and there is a like alien virus that kind of got released in book 1, and so that's a thing, but also all of the impacts of that and how that's handling things politically, because like Earth and Mars and the belt are all kind of like against each other in various ways, and so all of that is happening. So I kind of consider this like, it's not the same writing as Game of Thrones, but it's Game of Thrones in space in a way that like there is this supernatural thing, in this case like scientific, but kind of supernatural thing looming, but then we're all fighting about the political stuff. Like that's kind of what this series is. So it's very space opera-y. This book has been my favorite of the recent installments. I really liked book 1, like I think the most, and I've liked the rest of them too, but this one has been my favorite recently because we're only having POV characters who are characters that we know. So we are following this crew of this ship called the Rocinante, and we have been with these characters and around these characters for a while because we always follow James Holden, who's like the main character of the series, and he is the captain of that ship. But we don't usually get POVs of the other characters, and there's 3 other ones on this ship, and we actually get them in this, and we get their backstory, and like they're going and doing individual things that eventually intersect, and I loved that. I loved that so much. So I gave this like 4 to 4.5 stars. This was just like the most solid of the recent installments. While there's still things moving along the plot and whatever, it was just fun to be in characters' heads that like I know and love, instead of sometimes like usually each book there's new characters who are somehow involved in everything that we follow them a lot, even though they're interacting with like Holden and the crew, and we actually got to be in their heads this time, which I loved. There are triggers in here for suicidal thoughts and some just like darker topics because the characters are sort of exploring backstory things. But yeah, suicide being the main one. Yeah, I'll be continuing with this series because I quite enjoy it. Those are all my thoughts on my most recent reads. Comment them below. Let me know if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys soon. Bye.